I end up taking that I own the customer to its worst extremes, to where I got the reputation as the VP of no and sometimes hell no. And it all came down to one simple problem that I was solving the wrong way. We had too many people interacting with the customers, which confused them. The way I solved it, I don't care who you were, if you were not in my org, you had to get a passport from Anthony before you can go to customer land. I need to understand what your goals were before you were permitted to talk to customers. So it solved the problem, but it also created some friction between me and my peers at the C-suite.
Welcome to Customer Unsuccess, the podcast where we cut out the noise and talk with real leaders about their hardest lessons in customer success and other go-to-market motions. I'm your host, Joe DeGrande, and in each episode, we're going to unpack real challenges from real leaders, failed tech implementations, a strategy that didn't yield results, or difficult customers. But more importantly, we're going to take those lessons learned and share them with you so that way you can avoid those same mistakes with your team. So if you're in customer success, sales, or other go-to-market motions, stick around to hear from the best. Now let's dig into it. On this week's episode of Customer Unsuccess, we have Anthony DeShazer, a customer success leader and CCO group leader of Pavilion, previously working at companies like Giftly and Rimini Street. He shares how a helicopter CCO approach earned him a reputation for saying no to every request, and also how he rebuilt his entire mindset with a yes and approach to break down those silos. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you do too. Now let's dive in. Let's kick this show off, Anthony. Awesome.
Sure.
So thanks for joining me. So I have Anthony DeShazer on the call today on the Customer Unsuccess podcast. He's a CS leader with many years of experience. He's a frequent contributor in Pavilion and the ATL CS community as well. And so he's got a lot of knowledge. But thanks again, Anthony, for coming on.
Glad to be here, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, good stuff. So yeah, we got into talking. We actually met at the ATL, Customer Success Community Conference in this past March, and obviously there's a lot of things going on in customer success. Lots of different stuff. There's a lot of changes, but you actually had mentioned a story to me about when working with customers. I think you mentioned it. You coined it as like you were the helicopter CCO at a couple or one or a few organizations, and you kind of got the reputation of no and hell no. So I got to know the story of kind of how that transpired, because I'm sure it's a good one. But yeah, good stuff.
Well, definitely a lot of lessons learned. So most CS leaders, the first time you become a CS leader, you really adopt this I own the customer view. And it was not any negative viewpoint, but you take responsibility to drive customer experience, drive that renewal, drive the adoption. That's your goal.
Right.
So you get very, very almost like a dog with a new bone. Hey, I'm just going to just grind this thing out. Well, that went awry for me the first time. I end up taking that I own the customer to its worst extremes, to where I got the reputation, as you noted, as the VP of no and sometimes hell no. And it all came down to one simple problem that I was solving the wrong way. The problem was simply we had too many people, or had a lot of people interacting with the customers, which confused them. Who do I go to for what? And now, why are you talking to me again? And what happened to the last three people I talked to? Why am I starting over from the beginning with you when I've been talking to your company now for 3 years? So the way I solved it was you could not, I don't care who you were, if you were not in my org, you had to get a passport from Anthony before you can go to customer land. You had to go through, I need to understand what your goals were. I had to understand how you're prepping for the call. What are the next steps out of it? You had to hit my check mark, my task list, my checkoff list before you were permitted to talk to customers. So it solved the problem, but it also created, I will call it, some friction between me and my peers at the C-suite. Product couldn't get the conversations they needed because they had to go through my team. Sales felt like they were kind of boxed out of things because I was kind of standing at the door guarding. Marketing was like, hey, wait, we need some case studies. We need some other things. And There's some things I learned from doing that I just gladly will not do again.
Mm. Yeah, that's tough. Yeah, being essentially, it sounds like it's essentially, well, one, you were solving for too many cooks in the kitchen, essentially, and then, but it was almost like too much of a
Yeah.
gatekeeping concept. I guess, like, tell me more about I guess, like, first, like how were you self-aware of this? Like, did the problem come up, or did someone give you that feedback initially? Because that's a tough one. Because, like, I know you could get kind of wrapped up, not you, just anybody could get wrapped up in their own process, and you're like, it's hard to take a step back. But I'm curious, like, how do you identify that as like that problem?
So I had two, I'll use the term more senior members of the
Sure.
staff kind of pull me aside and basically said, hey, you might want to change your reputation.
Mm.
One of the posts I saw this morning, because one of the first things I do while I'm, eating my Cheerios or whatever I'm having for breakfast, I go through LinkedIn because I try to keep up with what's coming out and things of that nature. And there was a post this morning, I think it was released last week, but it was on my feed this morning that really, really linked to this conversation. It basically says, out of all the things, is your reputation precedes your resume.
Mm.
That what people know and say about you actually gets ahead of you before your resume. And what these two colleagues of mine were trying to let me know is that although I may have good intentions and I'm getting decent results, the reputation of Anthony being difficult to work with was going out ahead of all the accomplishments. And so what that was doing was flavoring the accomplishments. Yep, he achieved these, but man, he's hard to work with.
Mm.
Oh, he's gotten this done, and yep, he's making these results, but man, think about all the friction, how much we have to go through just to work with his team.
Yeah, I was taking like some notes because I want to touch on that. It's funny too because friction, again, I come more from like CS and RevOps,
Yeah.
realm, and friction's important, to a certain degree, right? Making sure things are updated appropriately, or whether you're taking certain project requests and so on. But it is true where if it's too much, right? You have to actually think of what's the downstream impact of like actually getting things done sometimes, even though it might result, you get some good metrics or performance out of it. What is the other, like, I guess, like the political impact too, just as far as how you're working with people, different team members? Maybe they might be more reluctant to bring different ideas and so on because it might be too challenging to kind of get it across the line. There's a lot of stuff there. I mean, I don't know if, yeah, I mean, yeah, that's deep. It's deep.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess it's the growth that I had to go through.
Yeah.
That you have to find way of solving problems without being disagreeable. How do you help solve your problem, the thing that you're tasked with, but facilitate others? And
Mm.
one of my later peers said, it's how do you do yes and versus no? So I went through a progression where I went from no to yes, but,
Mm.
and then my later progression with some help was to go from yes and.
Mm.
Because once you do no, yep, that you're putting up a full stop rather. When you do yes, but, that but actually is almost a soft stop. You're still putting a hurdle. You're still negating. You're just like, yeah, but. So that's still almost creating a confrontation. Yes, and it's like, you're right. I'm here to help you, but let me tweak this a little bit so it's a win-win for both. It's a different approach. It's finding that yes and solution to everything. It doesn't mean you don't say yes. It doesn't mean you kind of avoid no, because sometimes something really is a full stop no. But let that be the exception versus the rule. Don't rule by no, rule by yes and, so to speak, or lead by yes and then use the no's when necessary, because then the no's become impactful.
Mm.
But if you're always saying no, you become like the kid who cried wolf.
It's true.
So are you saying no because it's really not a good idea or because it has a negative impact? Or are you just saying no because you're difficult?
Right.
So that branding changed how people saw me and how they interacted with me. And it was of my own creation.
Yeah. It's tough too, because, you could also just inadvertently kind of fall in the trap, right?
Oh, yeah.
In the beginning, you kind of, whether it's priority or just maybe it's not a good idea or whatever it is, and then eventually you start to default to no, and it's just it's a mindset shift. It's a total mindset shift.
Yeah, yeah, it took some executive coaching
Yeah.
for me.
It's
And by
good
the
though.
way, those who don't have executive coaches, I absolutely recommend it.
Yeah.
I have a few I can even recommend because I've used two throughout my career since then, and they have been very helpful in helping me reflect on me, so to speak. Having those extra eyes that, even though they're not in the day to day battle with you, can actually help you still see yourself in new ways. But yeah, it was my journey there. I mean, how I got to that with that role is that I really was trying to do the right thing for my customers, since that was my charge. That's what I was responsible for. But I was also trying to do the right things for my team, because I was responding mostly to my team's frustration that there are a lot of people talking to customers. They're going in trying to renew or trying to expand or do whatever I've tasked them to do. And then the customer blindsides them and says, "Oh, I was just talking to Joe last week, or I was just talking to Sally last week about X, Y, and Z." And they're like, "Okay, that's not even in line with what my success plan is." So that now has derailed things, and they're still held accountable. So I had two voices in my ears. So it wasn't the wrong problem to solve. It was just the wrong solution.
Wrong solution. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because now I want to dig a little bit deeper into the how you would approach it now, right?
Oh,
So we talked about the challenges. It's very much you're kind of the helicopter CCO, right? You're just on top of everything. And I'm curious now because it's like essentially delegation is a big part of it, right? And also trust. But I'm curious as far as those are the overall themes. I'm curious about the actual like what you've changed in your approach, whether it's you or how you would even do it now, knowing.
sure. One of the first things I do whenever I go to a new company as some sort of revenue leader or customer experience leader, first thing I want to do is, what's the customer journey? How do all the players interact with the customer, and how are those interactions moving the customer to success and us to revenue? So if that's unclear, that's one of the first places I want to lean into, because that, I found, is the missing element to make sure everyone knows their role and how they should interact with customers. So now, instead of being the no, well, can we at least agree on why you interact with the customer, when you interact with the customer, and how to do it so that this other motion continues? So it's not a no, it's yes, but here's how. Or more specifically, yes, and here's how.
And yeah, the key theme of the and it's like continuing on kind of how to support. Yeah, and that makes sense. It's right. It's the emphasis on the how.
Yeah.
When you say unclear on, I believe you mentioned about like responsibilities or different paths. Like tell me more about that, because I think there's confusion in the space of who manages what and so on. So I'm like curious when you say like if you were to come in an organization and that whole experience, it's just unclear for the customer journey of who's responsible. Tell me more about like what you've seen or what you mean by that.
What's funny is that the same confusion you see in the marketplace, in the professional sphere, and LinkedIn, you often see inside companies.
Hmm.
One of my big thrusts right now is GTM alignment. And when I join or I look at companies or work with companies, one of the first things I spot is that you have different departments warring against each other because they each think they own a certain aspect of the customer journey.
Hmm.
And the reality is the customer journey needs to be owned by the company. Different parts of it may be shepherded by different leaders, but there needs to be a ownership at the C level. And it may be assigned to one exec to kind of oversee it, but it needs to be, I don't own the customer journey. I own the process of generating the customer journey. But the customer journey itself is owned by the company. And now once we get that mentality that we're all on the same team working together, Now we can figure out, okay, what's your role? What's your play at this point in the journey? One of the areas where I see the most conflict is when you start dealing with customer marketing and looking for advocacy and the customer success team. So if the customer success team was not responsible for customer advocacy, but customer marketing is, often customer marketing needs to interact with customers to find those success stories, to help nurture those advocates. Well, that requires them to have access to the customers without stepping on the renewal, the expansion motions, and everything else. So how do you now get customer marketing and customer success to work together so it's a win-win for everyone?
Yeah.
That's where the customer experience, mapping that experience out so that everyone understands what are the triggers that customer success, or even in the data that says this is a potential advocate. Now, how do we get that off to marketing? Now, marketing, what's your playbook and how do you work with customer success? Instead of doing your own thing, it's an integrated journey where no one team is in it by themselves. They're supported by all the other teams.
Marketing has a hard time with work. There's a constant debate with CS. You're 100% on the ball. I hear the story all the time. I was working with a team and they asked the question, like, how do you get them to be in alignment on what touch points and who's responsible for what? I'm curious. And you mentioned some interesting pieces too, right? About, do they even have access or to the information? I guess, like, tell me about like what that looks like, right? Like, when we talk about access, is it just more of like a political thing in terms of like, hey, are they allowed to communicate, or is it just more so, is there an actual tactical, limitation as well? Like, I guess, like, tell me more, because that's one that comes up, and I feel like they're touching the customer, right? There's so many different touch points that they both, interact with them. So I'm curious to hear from your perspective, like, what are some of those challenges in terms of getting the access, like, more specifically?
Well, it really comes down to how do you balance the different needs from an employee standpoint. I'll take it there first. Individual employees, they have their own KPIs they need to pursue. If you're in CS, you need to get the revenue. You need to drive adoption or revenue, whatever your mandate is. You need to get after that. But customer marketing's there to get advocates in this case, because in most companies, those advocates actually help fuel upstream sales. And one of the companies I worked for before, we had a known relationship between advocacy and closed deals. Every closed deal required 2 or 3 actual customer references. And so that meant if we didn't have a great pipeline of customer advocates, then we had a problem closing upstream deals. So if you own customer marketing, that's the thing that you're charged with, but customer success is charged with getting the renewals. Now you have 2 teams potentially worrying for the same customer. So now you got to figure out, how do you do these 2 motions where they don't conflict with one another, but actually supplement and amplify each other? And this is, again, where I go back to the journey. But one of the things most people don't realize about the journey, it requires data. You got to know what are the trigger points, what makes someone a good advocate, and how do you detect that, a potential advocate rather, and how do you detect that in the data you have? So now that when this person, this customer, is demonstrating the possibility of becoming an advocate, that trigger goes off both for customer marketing and for CS that says, this is a potential play to build the advocate. Now, once the 2 teams are aligned that this is a potential advocate, this is how we work together to accomplish both. And you may then put some rules if you need some clear lanes around renewals, depending on how your renewals are and how tricky they are from a commercial standpoint. Maybe you say someone's an advocate, but we don't pursue any, someone's a potential advocate, but we don't pursue any new advocate motions with this customer 60 days before the renewal, because the contract negotiations may be difficult.
Right.
So you don't want to confuse that, or in some cases, even have the customer get smart and use the advocacy as a negotiation technique on the renewal. So it's knowing these scenarios, being able to lay them out and have everyone in the room agree to, yep, yeah, you know what? This is probably not the right time to start a new conversation about being a reference or being an advocate for us. But this time is. So now you have joint agreement on what are the rules of engagement and how now do we move the customer forward, but also help deliver for these two leaders or these two teams with competing metrics technically.
So true. Yeah, I was just taking some notes here, but data is it's a real important one. And you know me, like I stress on this enough, like coming from like a tech touch digital CS, CS ops world, you can't do much without being able to segment your customers and understanding when things should be happening. But I think it's also important, what you called out, it's kind of setting the process and rules first. And then it's like, okay, now do we have that information in order to do what we want to do? Right. Do we have those data points? I don't think it's
first though. I think it's iterative. It's because sometimes you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
So you start the journey, you learn because, hey, we engaged the customer marketing team talking to this customer and oops, we found they're now using advocacy as a negotiation technique to drive down the price of the renewal. Okay, if that's the case, maybe we now need to figure out or add to our data, what's the window? And so sometimes it's not you have everything up front, it's creating a kind of a culture where it's okay if we do this iterative thing. Hey, we found this out. What's the data that helps inform that this is an issue? But then what's the data, once we agree that it's an issue, what's the data to help us prevent this issue?
Right.
And so it's that iterative nature that the data becomes the actual fuel for the engine. And so now you need to build the engine, but sometimes you may need to, I need the little fuel injector over here. I need to up the octane over there because of what we're trying to do. That's the way I look at it. It's not that I have to have all the data up front. I need to be willing to go back and enrich the data or add more data when needed.
For sure. You're 100% on the ball. And I actually, going on the data piece, which is interesting, we talk about like customer advocacy. I think there's a number of ways in which you could segment your data and understand like, hey, who is an advocate, right? It's also interesting too, like the different teams and if they do think differently, right? Like between marketing and customer success. I guess like tell me more about how in your experience as far as like, and obviously it's going to be the depends, right, on the organization, but like generally speaking, when you define an advocate, right, what does that look like when you could start to segment and, and kind of figure out who those people you should be talking to?
Sure. One of the things I look at is personas. You got to first figure out the personas that you have in your customer. One of the things that I have become a strong, believer in, and this terminology matters. Customers don't make decisions. People within the customer make decisions. Employees of the customer make decisions. So you need to know which employee or which team member of the customer makes the best advocate for you. So, and that really depends on what are you trying to achieve from a marketing standpoint or a sales standpoint. So if I need, 3 or 4 references for new business or even expansion, I need to understand what voice within my customers, what persona has the most weight when it comes to providing those types of references or that type of advocacy. And so what I look for is what voice and what message. And a lot of that comes from understanding your go-to-market motions and what do you need. And so now you can go through, and AI makes this a lot better. Look at your past history with customers who've been able to, and personas have been able to deliver the type of message you want. Look at the patterns in the data, the usage data, the signals, the customer value you've delivered. Figure out then using AI, hey, these are the patterns we saw in the data that at least have a high correlation to this particular persona given this type of message. Now, while it may not be exactly 100% predictive, it can at least give you something to work for that can improve your accuracy of finding the right voice with the right message for what you need in terms of customer advocacy. That's the wonderful thing about AI and data right now. The age we're in with generative AI being just so readily available, without even having to build AI agents, you can actually just use prompts to get some very insightful data about your customers.
Tell me more about that, because I've been going down this path as well when it comes to AI, especially when, again, when we're talking about CS, I feel like there's tons of opportunity where to bring in third-party data, right? There's a ton of first-party data if they have it together, right? Like from the first-party perspective, but the third-party data kind of, in my opinion, kind of levels it up. So you mentioned like AI agents, like I guess like talk to me we're on this realm of like customer advocacy, right? Like tell me more about how AI is kind of changing the game there, because I've seen a few, but I'm curious from your perspective what you're seeing.
The first place, since I call it the bring your own AI strategy, most companies have adopted that, where almost everyone has access to ChatGPT. Either the company's paying for it or they themselves are using it, the free version, or paying for it. Or even Claude or whatever they have, Jasper, whatever they're using. Everyone has some sort of chat bot that they're communicating with.
Sure.
You can start there without even getting external data yet. You can start, if you can get your data in any sort of time series that has, hey, this is a customer data by date. Here's what they were doing on this date, summarized particularly at a target persona level. Hey, I think if I'm looking for advocacy, I need, CEOs, or if that's the persona you need, that are willing to say this message. And here's historic data. Here's the performance of the customer, what we were doing for this customer or past customers, where we got the CEO to give this type of message. And that will start to give you an idea just by giving that historic data, and then prompt the actual chat GPT or the model to identify the patterns that lead up to that. Give it like a 30 or 45 day window that lead up to this, 30 to 45 days before we get that. It can identify patterns by itself without really having to do anything. You just have to have, that data aggregated to a daily level. That's what I recommend. And do a little feature engineering and look at the trends. Do like the 7-day, 21-day, 35-day, 28-day, all that averages of those key metrics. And then include in that any of the metrics you believe are relevant. Now, this is where you need to have a little bit of insight into your experience so you can decide what are the right metrics. And it will, at least with what you gave it, identify potential patterns. Again, they won't be strongly predictive, or may or may not be strongly predictive, but they at least have some sort of correlation to the data that give you some sort of pool to go with. It's a segment. You can start there. And you run that periodically, and you then say, hey, here are the patterns. Now, here's my current data of people who are not advocates. Identify some people matching the patterns that you already identified that I should target for advocates. That's just using first-party data. It's what you have in your system. Now, with the ability to do deep research, you can now take this candidate pool. Have your chat, if you want to do this just with chat, you can do this with agents too. Now have your chat just go out and do deep research on each of those customers and give you analysis of what other things are they saying in the marketplace and how that might be relevant to the message you want to deliver. Because now you have something that when you do draft that email or do that engagement, you now understand why they're a potential advocate. You can talk about the value or whatever those things are that matter to the customer that you found in that pattern. But you can also look at what they have been saying and how the message you're wanting to deliver amplifies what they've already said. You can connect it to something that they're already doing. That's just using chat and deep research. Your existing data in some sort of time series, chat, and the ability to do deep research.
It's incredible.
Take that to the next level with an agent. Now, I'm not all the way there yet where I'm willing to let the agent go off and just send emails on my behalf.
Sure.
I've seen some great use cases in the SDR realm where that's working well. I've seen some great use cases like at GitHub and other places where they're doing chat, where they have bots actually answering requests. I've seen some stuff that Zendesk is doing. Love what's there. In the middle right now with customer success and advocacy, I'm not quite there yet, but I can see myself getting there quickly. But I can see building an agent that does that automatically, that looks at these patterns, detects the patterns, constantly monitoring my data of customers every day, identifying the potential new advocates, going out doing deep research on these advocates, coming back with a draft email or a draft engagement or justification or a request, so to speak, of why you should be willing to talk about my company. That is powerful to me.
Yeah.
But that's where we are. You can train an agent to find those patterns, and then get another agent or the same agent. I like to separate these two because I'm still have my old software development days. So I actually think about reuse. So I think of micro agents versus the macro agents, like microservices versus the monolithic systems we used to build. So I literally build smaller agents to tackle individual tasks that I can reuse. So I'm already thinking in that way. So whether that's good or bad, I'm still looking at the research to see if that's the right way to go. But that's just the way my mind thinks. So now I have these two agents, one that can find the patterns for me and score my existing customers for advocacy. And then I have another agent that can go do deep research on customers and come back and tell me, hey, here's why they should be or what they should be saying, because it's in the same mode of what they're already saying. It's complementary of what they're already saying. Now I combine those two, and then I get recommendations with an actual, here's the customer, here's why they should be an advocate, and here's the message I would suggest.
Yeah. It's actually fascinating. I mean, like what you can do now with these agents. And we haven't even, you're 100% right. We haven't even fully gotten to the point where everyone's comfortable like automating it completely. But it's nearly there. I was using
there.
it's great. I was actually at Outreach. They had a conference at Unleash, not too far from me, and their biggest release is like their revenue AI agents, and I'm watching it in real time, and it is doing elements of kind of what you're describing. Obviously, more on the new business side. They have some focus on CS as well, but it's still incredible on the recommendations that it's able to provide the reps, vet through, who that customer is, tie in the first party data. And then as long as you have, and in their case, I think you need a third party data provider to be integrated. But the point is, it's removing almost some of that thinking work. It's simplifying it substantially. I was even using Clay recently on how you could bring in your first party data.
I saw that post you made on the QBR.
Oh, it's intense. It's crazy. I mean, it is, I will say, you got to know how to use it. I think that's the biggest thing. It's extremely powerful. And with any of these AI agents and tools, and I think that's where you're seeing those prompt engineering roles.
You got to know what's the right question to ask it to get what you need.
100%. But once we get past that hurdle, it's changing the game substantially.
To be honest, the only thing that's stopping me from just going full-fledged on just, AI everything is the governance that's needed to make sure that your AI doesn't go off the rails.
Oh, yes.
I made a post earlier this month, in the month of June, that I was building a prototype for a prospect where I used this similar method that is described. Hey, let me get some of your customer retention data, and then we can predict the patterns, or at least identify the patterns that you may not even know, that predict or at least have some sort of correlation to higher risk of churn. Great, let's do that. So built that, then went back and said, well, as an extra credit, let me go back and rescore these same customers and say, how much money could we have actually saved had we deployed these sooner? Well, the number the AI agent came up with was just too good to believe.
Yeah.
And so I lost a weekend digging into it. This is when my analytic days kicked in. It's like, nah, that number can't be right. I mean, this is a company that had less than 20 million ARR. Yeah. And we're talking about finding over 4 million in lost revenue in one quarter. That doesn't sound right. Now, if it's true, man, I'll be a billionaire by now because I've been selling that solution out in the market. And, hey, just with my tool, you could have saved a quarter of your ARR,
Right.
in one. Yeah, that I would be having a totally different conversation if that was true.
Yeah.
But when I went back and I really challenged the model and I really challenged the agent, I took what it was finding and I actually put a chat bot in front of it and let me query this thing. Okay. How did you come up with these patterns? What makes you think these? I literally started interrogating it.
Yep.
And that's when I realized it was hallucinating. It was finding patterns that didn't exist. Now, here's the thing. I told it in the instructions not to hallucinate.
Yeah.
What I had to figure out by doing research, this is why I lost a weekend, is what are the settings on the actual, this was OpenAI, on ChatGPT, what are the settings on the agent, on the model that I can set to help it be less fuzzy and more predictable? That's where I'm like, the fine tuning of these systems so that they don't hallucinate and you get, I won't necessarily say repeatable, because the whole nature of generative AI is that it's not supposed to be repeatable. It should be a human ration. I mean, this is why they do great at writing. You and I can go ask the same model to write the same thing and it'll come up with different things. That's a good thing.
Right.
That's a good thing. But in certain areas, you need to make sure you have the right guardrail. So I'm now researching what are those tools that you can put in place to make sure your content and whatever this thing is generating stays within certain parameters. So once I get those and I'm very comfortable with those, I'm probably going to be the person heads down. My next org that I build would probably be all AI agents with some people overseeing them.
Yeah.
Because of that. I mean, it's that good.
It is. It's definitely 100%. Like, I think they have to get better at preventing them from hallucinating. I think it's a good example of this. I mean, this is going back to like my market research days, but for example, if you were to run like a simple survey and if you don't put an other option, right, might be leading, it's something as simple as that. So you're leading the witness. So you kind of have to take that mindset, so to speak, when working with these, AI agents, chatbots, etc., that you might need to give it an out, right? So it's not, if it doesn't have an answer, it just doesn't make one up. I've seen that in a couple of templates and prompt examples to circumvent that, but it's still hard. They kind of still go off the rails. Seen some crazy stuff. It's why I'm laughing, but
yeah, I have too. And I've been doing more research on the techniques. The one great thing about me being one of the functional leaders in the pavilion is that I get to talk to a lot of leaders, not just in CS, or other CCOs. I'm actually talking to revenue leaders across the whole go-to-market space. And I'm connected with some great AI leaders, AI and revenue leaders, and they're giving me techniques of how do you build it where it has the guardrails in place. And that's giving me a whole new perspective.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's fast. I will say it's fast. It's insane. Like every time I wake up, I'm like, all right, what's going on in the news? I've subscribed to, I don't know if you've heard of it, or at least been pushed to me recently, the Revenue Brew. They're like a sub newsletter out of Morning Brew. Yeah. And I check it out and it's just, it's almost to the point where it's overwhelming how quickly the space is changing and evolving right in front of our eyes. But it's definitely going to be the most talked about for sure, for at least the next 5 years or longer.
Oh, it's longer because this is what AI is doing to, you can call us knowledge workers, is what, the great industrial revolution of the early 20th century did to the physical workers.
Right.
It's the same parallel and it's only getting started. It's accelerating now. And so this is the transformative time. And one of the quotes I heard from one of the support leaders at SAP at a recent conference was, AI is not about technology, it's about business transformation. Yeah. And so those who are still looking to adopt a technology, you're missing the boat. It's how do you rethink how you function in this realm? It's no longer AI agents or AI chatbots. It's like, how do I redesign my org now that I have AI agents?
Yeah.
How do I, and what I'm seeing companies do is, how do I flatten my org structure? Because I have the ability now to share this data to do a lot, I can break down walls in my org structure. I can now possibly, get one CSM to do several jobs, or I can look at marketing and have marketing not only do, because of the creative, ability of AI. Hey, I don't need you just to do, prospect marketing. I don't need you just to go after acquisition. You now have bandwidth. Put your eyes on retention too, and
Of course.
expansion in the existing customer lane.
Yep.
So what does that mean now for the CS leaders that have built their own marketing departments underneath them because traditional marketing was not paying attention? It's an opportunity for me to now rethink how work gets done in a company that will help us be more aligned, because we have this thinking lifting, that it's lifting some of the heuristics, some of the work around creating these creative assets for us, and allows us to do more with less. And that's scary, but it's also very liberating and very challenging at the same time.
No, you're 100% right. It's but I mean, the main thing is just take it in strides. It's kind of what I tell people, especially when it comes to just any technology. Just
Oh yeah.
bite off
The key
only.
thing is
Yeah.
we're all learning at this point. So there'll be more help for more content for your podcast.
Yep.
Because we're all learning. So there'll be more things about, here's what happened when I deployed an AI agent without the guardrails. And here's the promise it made. There's going to be an episode where I'm sure that's going to come up for you.
I'm sure.
But this is where we are. This is the time where we can experiment and innovate and just rethink how customer success, or even broader, how does go to market happen now?
Yeah. 100%. I know we kind of went on different paths, but all it's great. I love it. I mean, I think the main thing though, going back to, we're coming up on time, but going back to like the initial piece, right? We're talking about the helicopter CCO, right? Yeah. And creating a process around it, and then it has to do with, right, the key takeaway, right, making sure that you have that cross-functional alignment, making sure everyone has a say and they're kind of brought in. It's going to change with AI, but if anything, enable it further if done well. But I guess, like, to kind of wrap up, I guess, like, from your perspective, what are some additional key takeaways if we're going to leave it with the audience, whether AI is going to have an impact, or just in general about, not being that, this helicopter CCO as you define it, and making sure that you overall, like, work as a team and be collaborative. I'm curious to hear your final kind of takeaway there.
The one thing that I have been preaching now is that we all need to adopt a mindset that revenue is an all team, full contact sport. Yeah. No one team can do it on their own. And companies that think that either sales does close business by themselves or CS does renewals by themselves, I think it's missing the boat. And the reality is every single person on a revenue team needs everyone else. It doesn't mean you don't hold each other accountable for delivering your part. Not at all. But it is just the acknowledgement that we're all in this together. So any solution you come up with, or any strategy or perspective you take that puts you at war with someone else on the revenue team, it's the wrong solution.
Yeah, no, I love it. 100%. Yeah, it's definitely revenue is everyone's responsibility. That's like the kind of the key thing. I'm curious, obviously AI is a big focus right now. You're digging into it, but I'm curious, just from your overall career, like, where do you go to learn, whether it's books or podcasts? I'm always curious as far as, how people are expanding their knowledge other than like traditional, like, education. I'm always fascinated by like different ways in which you can kind of self-help and learn.
So one of the things I've encouraged people to do is use Chat GPT or Claude as your personal coach. You can actually go ask it to come up with a AI training program for you, or learning program, and give it a budget. I don't want to spend more than X. So then you can prioritize different courses for you. I did that about 3 months ago, and it came back to me with a whole program that I've been following. It had courses on Coursera, that I could go take to give me some foundational. And I found those courses very interesting because that's how I start learning how to program in Python. I had to pull out my old Java development and C++ development days and go back and learning Python. But that was my first true machine learning course where I understood the difference between generative AI and machine learning, because they're all areas of AI, but they're different and they have different, strengths and weaknesses. So go back and ask ChatGPT or any one of your chat platforms you have to generate a learning program for you about AI. Tell it what level of proficiency you want to get to. Tell it about, where you're starting and how much money you're willing to spend. Right now, I'm taking some, I call it professional education courses to get certifications in AI from Georgia Tech University is one. And then I have another that I'm exploring to see if it's worthwhile and if I have the time to do it. That's actually at Stanford. So these are things that are available. You can, sign up for the courses. Some of them are inexpensive. Some of them are rather pricey, but they can give you that background. Besides that, what I found that the chat bot came up with me is some people to follow. I actually asked it, who should I follow on LinkedIn? And even, what are some YouTube channels? So that is what I would suggest. I literally have a plan I can pull up right now where I'm just checking off the boxes where my AI learning path has been mapped out by AI.
Nice.
That's the wonderful thing. It's the most recursive thing I've ever seen. I can ask AI to teach me AI, and it will.
Yeah, it's actually incredible. I mean, it's almost, I guess, like what is it, kind of like Inception, right? Like you're probably eventually start asking it how to prompt it, and then it's.
I do that. No. You can actually do that.
Yeah.
There are times when I'm writing a prompt and it's not giving me what I'm thinking I should get. I actually would go back and ask chat, hey, help me write this prompt. Here's what I want to accomplish. Here's what I have so far. And it comes back and rewrites my prompt.
Wow.
So this is the power of generative AI. And so I use it not just, for research. I won't call it my life coach or professional coach. Wouldn't do that at all because I actually think that human connection is so important.
Yep.
And so I actually have, executive coaches and mentors that I lean on. But ChatGPT is like, hey, give me a roadmap for this. I want to do this. Give me a roadmap.
It's awesome.
So I love it.
Good stuff. No, I think, it's exciting stuff that we're coming up on. But I guess without, I guess the final thing is I'm curious, where can everybody find you? You got a wealth of knowledge. I'm curious as far as where can everybody follow you and your insights and, what you're doing in the space.
Sure. Of course, you can find me on LinkedIn. It's my first initial last name. So DeShazor, DESHAZOR. You can find me on LinkedIn. If you're a member of Pavilion, just hit me up. I'm one of the functional leaders of the CCO function. I'm always on the internet. And of course, if you're in the ATLCS, the Atlanta Customer Success Community, I'm always available for a chat.
Awesome. Good stuff. Well, I really enjoy the chat, Anthony. We'll put some of that in the show notes, but thanks so much for coming on. It was a great convo.
Great conversation, man. We went off the rails a little bit, but I enjoyed it. So thank you for allowing me to geek out on AI.
No, this is awesome. I really enjoyed it. I'm always happy to go off the rails as a conversation, not just AI. Awesome.
All right, man.
That's a wrap for today's episode. Thanks so much for listening. If you got some value from this conversation, hit subscribe, leave a rating or review, and share it with someone who's also out there trying to build a better customer success or go-to-market strategy, even if it's messy along the way. And if you want more frameworks, tools, automated playbooks, check out jodastechtouch.com and subscribe to our newsletter. That link is in the description. Thanks so much for being here. Keep building, keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next one. Quick note before we wrap, this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. The ideas and opinions shared here are of my own or those of my guests, and don't reflect the views of any current or former employers, clients, or partners. We might reference tools, platforms, or companies, but nothing shared here should be taken as fact, endorsement, or criticism. Do your own research and always consult your team or legal counsel when making any business decisions. This content is not legal, financial, or business advice. It's just us sharing what's worked, what hasn't, and how we've learned from both. So thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time.